It is 11:40 on Wednesday night, and a browser tab is open to a hand plane that costs $470. The screen glows in a dark kitchen. The house is quiet. Everyone else is asleep. The cursor hovers over the reviews, not reading them for information anymore, but reading them for confirmation. 3 videos have been watched, muted, showing shavings curling off the blade in ribbons so thin they are translucent, so uniform they suggest a relationship between steel and wood that borders on conversational. There is already a hand plane in the garage. It cost $60 at the hardware store 3 years ago. It works. It flattens boards. It smooths surfaces. It performs every function a hand plane is expected to perform. The $470 plane does the same things. The difference, if forced into language that would survive a conversation with the person sleeping upstairs, lives in the weight distribution, the way the sole is lapped to within 0.02 of an inch, the feel of the adjuster wheel under the thumb, the particular sound the blade makes when it is set correctly, and the first shaving lifts off the wood, the way a secret lifts off the chest when it is finally told to someone who understands. The cursor moves to the cart. The plane sits in the cart for 3 days. In those 3 days, the tab is opened 9 times. Each visit produces something in the chest that the workday did not produce, and that no amount of scrolling through anything else has ever replicated. This is not materialism, not status seeking, not the compulsive spending of someone who does not understand money or does not respect the household budget. Something more precise and more ancient is driving the cursor toward the checkout, and it has almost nothing to do with planes, and almost everything to do with what a certain kind of hand believes it deserves to hold. Psychologists who study consumer behavior distinguish between 2 categories of value: instrumental value, what an object does, and intrinsic value, what an object means. The $60 plane and the $470 plane have nearly identical instrumental value. Both flatten wood, both smooth surfaces, both produce shavings. The gap between them is entirely intrinsic, and intrinsic value is not irrational. It is the layer of meaning that the object communicates to the nervous system of the person holding it. The expensive tool says something to the hands that the cheap tool does not say. It says, this craft is serious. This relationship between your hands and this material is serious. The purchase is not about the tool. It is a declaration about their relationship. And the declaration changes the behavior of the person making it. The hands that hold the expensive plane pay more attention. The strokes are slower. The listening, because using a hand plane, well, is an act of listening, is deeper. The tool does not make the work better by being better. It makes the worker more present by demanding more presence. The weight of rosewood in a palm, the brass cap catching the shop light, the blade tested against a thumbnail, gripping with a precision that borders on having an opinion about the wood it is about to meet. The body recognizes the quality before the mind has organized a defense for the credit card statement. Dr. Kelly Lambert's research on the effort-driven reward circuit provides the neurological layer beneath the purchase. The ancient pathway, connecting physical hand movement to serotonin and dopamine production, does not fire uniformly across all tools. It responds to the quality of the sensory input. A blade that chatters across a surface, that bounces and stutters and requires constant correction, activates the circuit weakly because the feedback loop is interrupted. A blade that glides, that meets the wood with a resistance so calibrated it feels like collaboration rather than conflict, activates the circuit at a depth the cheap tool cannot reach. The shaving is not the product. The neurochemical state is the product. And the expensive tool optimizes the neurochemical state in the same way a well-tuned instrument optimizes the experience of playing music. The person is not paying $470 for steel and rosewood. They are paying for a deeper and more sustained activation of the only reward pathway their week reliably provides. A shaving so thin it curls into a complete spiral before separating from the board. The sound of it leaving the wood, almost nothing, almost silence. Almost the sound of something working exactly as it was designed to work, by someone who understood that the design was not about efficiency. It was about the relationship between the hand and the result. The $60 plane does not produce this sound. The $470 plane produces it on the first stroke. And the difference between those 2 sounds is not aesthetic. It is chemical. It is the difference between a circuit that flickers and a circuit that sustains. Embodied cognition research. Getting the finish right is the hardest part of any project. If you have ever dealt with bubbles, streaks, or coat that just would not dry, we put together a guide that covers everything the can does not tell you. Scan the code on screen or check the first comment below. Research reveals why the quality of the tool matters at a level the budget spreadsheet will never capture. The hands are not executors of the brain's instructions. They are cognitive organs. They think, they evaluate, they receive and process information from the environment in real time. A finely made tool extends the cognitive reach of the hand the way a ground lens extends the reach of the eye. The expensive plane communicates information about the wood that the cheap plane absorbs and muffles. grain direction, moisture variation, surface irregularity measured in thousandths. The hand holding the expensive tool is not holding the same object as the hand holding the cheap one. It is holding a higher resolution sensor. The information flowing from the wood, through the tool, into the hand, into the brain, is richer, more detailed, more actionable. The person who says it just feels different is not being vague. They are describing a genuine cognitive difference that the price tag does not explain, but that the nervous system verifies on every stroke. The grain of cherry under a blade set to 0.03 of an inch. The resistance shifts mid-stroke, where the grain reverses direction. The cheap plane transmits this change as a vague hesitation. The expensive plane transmits it as a specific sentence. The grain is changing, adjust the angle. Now, the hand adjusts without consulting the conscious mind. The surface that results is the distance between approximation and precision, and the hands know which one they produced, and the knowing matters in a place that has no vocabulary and no budget line. The impulse to own the best available version of a tool has a cultural lineage that predates the suburban garage by centuries. For most of recorded history, a craftsman's tools were his most valued possessions. They were not purchased seasonally or upgraded with trends. They were acquired slowly, maintained obsessively, inherited with reverence. In some traditions, they were buried with their owners. The quality of the tool was a direct and public statement about the seriousness of the craft and the identity of the person practicing it. A man with cheap tools was a man who had not yet earned better, or a man who did not take the work seriously enough to invest in the instruments of that seriousness. The Industrial Revolution severed this covenant. Mass production made tools disposable, interchangeable, stripped of biographical meaning. The person who spends $470 on a hand plane in a world of $60 alternatives is reaching backward through 2 centuries of industrialization to grab hold of the old agreement. The tool is not separate from the self. The quality of the tool is a statement about the quality of the attention, and the attention is the work. Everything else is just wood. The reminiscence bump adds a personal dimension that the cultural history cannot fully reach. Memory research documents that experiences from the identity-forming years, roughly 15 to 25, are retained with unusual vividness and emotional intensity. For many people who work with their hands, the formative tool experience was not a purchase. It was an encounter. A grandfather's plane, heavy and precise, handed across a workbench with a sentence like, "This one will last you." A father's set of chisels, stored in a canvas roll that smelled like oil and decades. The template for what a tool should feel like was set in those years, in those hands, in that light. The expensive tool purchased at 11:40 on a Wednesday night is not a response to marketing. It is a return to a sensory memory encoded during the years when the self was being formed. The weight of the new plane rhymes with the weight of the old one. The brass catches the light the same way. The purchase is not acquisition. It is the attempt to hold, one more time, the thing that was held when the world made sense and the workshop was not a hobby, but a home. There is someone who owns a set of chisels that cost more than the lumber they will ever shape. The chisels are stored in a leather roll that was purchased separately and is itself unreasonably expensive. They are sharpened on waterstones after every use, a ritual that takes longer than most of the cuts that preceded it. They have never been lit. When the hand closes around the handle, something in the posture changes that is visible from across the room. The shoulders square. The breathing slows. The cut that follows is not faster or more efficient than what a $20 chisel would produce. It is more deliberate, and the deliberateness is the point. The expensive tool does not make the work better. It makes the worker more present. It raises the standard by raising the stakes, and the raised stakes produce a state of attention that the cheap tool, with its implicit permission to be careless, does not demand. There's another who spent 3 months researching a single dovetail saw before purchasing it from a maker who builds fewer than 15 a month. The saw arrived in a wooden box with a handwritten note. The first cut was made on a Tuesday evening with no project in mind, just a scrap of pine and a pencil line. The kerf was so narrow it disappeared into the wood. The teeth tracked the pencil line with a fidelity that felt like agreement between the steel in the hand and the graphite, all 3 collaborating on a joint that did not exist yet, but that the cut was already promising. The saw was set on the workbench afterward and studied for a long time. Not admired, studied. The way a musician looks at an instrument after the first session in which the instrument does exactly what the body asked without the body having to explain. There's another who drives past 3 hardware stores to reach the one dealer who stocks the specific brand of marking gauge that uses a round cutter instead of a pin. The round cutter scores a line across the grain without tearing the fibers. The pin version tears. The difference is invisible in the finished joint to anyone who does not know where to look. But the hands know. The hands know that the line was clean, and the knowledge lives in the fingertips for the rest of the evening, and the evening is slightly different because of it. Slightly more ordered, slightly more deliberate. The gauge cost $80 more than the pin version. The $80 purchased a line that the hands would remember, and a feeling that the memory would produce, and a version of the evening that the cheaper tool could not have created. There's another whose wife found a receipt in a coat pocket for a combination square that cost as much as the coat. She asked about it. The explanation involved tolerances and blade flatness and the specific way the square registers against the edge of a board, and the explanation was accurate, but it was not the truth. The truth was that the square, when held, produced a feeling of authority that the cheap square did not produce. The truth was that the authority changed the measurement, not in the number it reported, but in the confidence with which the pencil line was drawn, and the confidence changed the cut, and the cut changed the joint, and the joint changed the piece, and the piece, when finished, would carry inside it the invisible residue of every decision that was made with conviction rather than approximation. The wife did not understand the tolerances, but she understood the voice. It was the voice he used when something mattered in a way he could not make smaller to fit the conversation. And she had learned, over years, that the voice was not about the object. It was about the part of him that only appeared when the object in his hand was worthy of his full attention. What most people see when someone spends $470 on a tool that performs the same function as the $60 version is irrational spending, poor financial judgment. A man who has confused quality with extravagance and cannot explain the difference because the difference lives in a place that language does not comfortably reach. What is actually happening is a neurological, cognitive, and cultural negotiation that the price tag does not capture and the receipt does not explain. The effort-driven reward circuit is optimizing for depth of sensory input, choosing the tool that produces the most sustained activation of the only reliable reward pathway in the week. The embodied cognition research tells us the tool is a cognitive extension, a sensor that transmits information the cheaper version muffles, and that the information changes the quality of the thinking the hands perform. The cultural history tells us the expensive tool is a covenant with a tradition that mass production tried to erase, a tradition in which the quality of the instrument was inseparable from the identity of the person holding it. The person is not overspending. They are investing in resolution, in presence, in the felt experience of meeting the work with an instrument that does not require the hands to compensate for its inadequacy. And the distance between the $60 plane and the $470 plane is not measured in dollars. It is measured in the quality of attention that each one permits, and attention is the only thing the hands have ever been trying to buy. If you have ever held two versions of the same tool, one cheap and one not, and felt a difference in your palm that you could not translate into a sentence that would survive the conversation at the dinner table, the difference was real. It was never about the steel. It was about what the steel let your hands become. The question is not why you spend what you spend. The question is what it means that the version of yourself you trust most, the one whose cuts are cleanest and whose joints are tightest and whose attention is most completely absorbed by the work, only appears when the tool in your hand is worthy of the effort your hands are offering. And whether the gap between what you hold and what you could hold is a financial question, or something older and less negotiable than money. If this video gave you a new way to understand what happens in your workshop, there is something we made for you. In the first comment below this video, there is a link to a guide we put together on how to get a perfect finish every time. Hundreds of subscribers already have their copy. It might be worth a look.